Think about the last time you had a strong moral reaction to something. Maybe you saw a video online, someone doing something that just felt wrong immediately, before you even had time to think. And then if someone challenged you on it, you had all these reasons ready, you explained why it was wrong, you made the case, you felt confident. Here's what Jonathan Haidt found when he studied that moment. The reasons came second, the feeling came first, always. And that is a profound inversion of how we typically assume our own minds work. We like to think of ourselves as rational judges, carefully weighing the evidence, considering the context, arriving at a highly calculated moral verdict. But the psychological research we are looking at today tells a very different story. Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. We are tackling something today that fundamentally shifted how I view every argument I have ever had, every political debate I have watched. Every time I felt that flash of outrage scrolling through my phone, it all looks different now. We are unpacking a massive body of research on moral psychology today, heavily anchored by Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. But we are also bringing in sharp philosophical critiques, related studies, and some fascinating evolutionary biology. The overarching goal here for you listening is to equip you with a new lens for viewing the world. We want to figure out why people are so fiercely divided by politics and religion, why arguments never seem to change anyone's mind. And most importantly, we want to walk away with practical, scientifically grounded tools so we can actually start communicating across these deep divides instead of just shouting past each other. I have to admit, diving into this material was a little destabilizing for me, in the best way possible, but still, the way the human brain makes moral decisions is just wild. It feels like popping the hood on your car, expecting a standard engine, and finding out the whole thing is running on rubber bands and pulleys, some ancient magic you did not know about. It completely challenges the fundamental assumption that we are primarily rational creatures, and that paradigm shift is exactly where we need to begin. To understand this, we have to look at the central metaphor Haidt uses to describe the divided mind. He asks us to imagine the human mind as a partnership between two very distinct entities. There is a very large, automatic, highly emotional elephant, and then there is a very small, conscious rider sitting on its back. Now, my immediate assumption, and I think the one that flatters our egos the most, is that the rider is the boss. We want to think the rider represents our conscious reasoning self, holding the reins, reading the map, steering the elephant wherever logic says we should go. And we actually inherited that flattering idea all the way back from Plato. It was heavily reinforced by the Enlightenment thinkers, the idea that reason is the master of the passions, or at least that it ought to be. But the empirical data shows us that the rider is not the boss, not even close. So what is the rider actually doing up there? The rider is more like the elephant's press secretary, or, if you want a legal framing, an inner lawyer. And I love that phrasing, even though it hits a little too close to home. Think about a press secretary at White House briefing. Their job is not to create the policy. Their job is to defend whatever the administration has already decided to do. The elephant, our intuition, our gut feeling, leans toward a judgment instantly. We are talking milliseconds. And then the rider, our conscious brain, frantically wakes up, looks at where the elephant is heading, and starts inventing a justification. The rider's job is to defend the elephant's leanings to the outside world, to build a compelling narrative so we look consistent and rational to our peers. It fundamentally changes how you view a debate. We are not scientists objectively searching for the truth. We are lawyers arguing a brief, arguing for a client who has already stubbornly made up their mind before the trial even started. And the psychological phenomenon that absolutely proves this is something researchers call moral dumbfounding. It happens when you strip away all of the inner lawyer's usual arguments. You leave the rider completely speechless, but the elephant continues to furiously insist on its initial judgment. To test this, researchers designed very specific scenarios, the harmless taboo violation. These scenarios are engineered to test exactly this disconnect. They trigger a massive visceral disgust reaction, but there is a catch. Let me walk you through a few of them so you can feel what I am talking about. Here is one. A family's beloved dog is tragically killed by a car right in front of their house. It was an accident. But they have always heard that dog meat is delicious, and they decide they do not want the meat to go to waste, so they cut up the dog's body, cook it, and eat it for dinner. Nobody sees them do it. Now pay close attention to the structural design of that scenario. The dog is already dead. They did not kill it. It was an accident, and they consume it in the absolute privacy of their own home. Ultimately, no one is hurt. Then there is the chicken story, which apparently got a lot of nervous laughter when researchers first presented it. A man goes to the supermarket, buys a dead chicken, brings it home, and before cooking it, has sexual intercourse with it. Again, very carefully constructed. He then fully cooks it and eats it. Done behind closed doors. Absolute privacy. And then there is a slightly different flavor of taboo. Moving away from biology, a woman is cleaning out her closet and finds an old American flag. She does not want it anymore, so she cuts it up into pieces and uses the rags to scrub her toilet. Nobody sees her do this. When you hear these stories, your immediate, uncontrollable reaction is, that is disgusting. That is wrong. You cannot do that. But here is where the trap snaps shut. Because these stories are painstakingly reverse engineered so that absolutely no one is harmed. Which is brilliant, because the writer's standard go-to argument completely disintegrates. Your inner lawyer stands up and says, objection, this causes harm. But the judge says, overruled. There is no victim. So when interviewers presented these stories and asked was it wrong, the overwhelming majority of people immediately said yes, but the fascinating part was when they asked why. The subjects would instantly start grasping at straws. There is another famous scenario involving a brother and a sister. It specifies they are consenting adults. They use double birth control, so there is zero chance of pregnancy. They do it once, just to see what it is like, and they keep it a secret. The subject says, well, it is wrong because they might have a child with severe genetic defects, and the interviewer calmly replies, but the story explicitly states they use two forms of birth control, so the subject's rider pivots. Well, it is going to ruin their relationship and cause trauma, and the interviewer reminds them, the story notes they both enjoyed it, it brought them closer, and they decided never to do it again. And at that exact moment, the subjects hit the wall of moral dumbfounding. They exhibit physical signs of confusion. They stutter. They laugh nervously. They literally say things like, I know it is wrong, but I just cannot think of a reason why. It is like deciding you absolutely hate a movie in the first 5 minutes just because of the vibe, and then spending the next 2 hours desperately scanning the screen for plot holes or bad lighting, just so you have a respectable reason to tell your friends why you hated it. The intuition launches the conscious reasoning, but the intuition does not depend on the success of that reasoning. The elephant does not care if the rider lost the debate, not at all. Even when the reasoning is systematically dismantled, the moral judgment remains rock solid. And what really struck me is that this is not just limited to wild taboo stories. There are non-moral tests that prove how aggressively the gut feeling dictates our behavior. Take the roach juice experiment. I consider myself a fiercely rational person until I read about this one. Researchers would take a completely sterilized dead cockroach. They would show it to the subject and explain, we bought this from a biological lab. It was raised in a sterile environment and then sterilized again in an autoclave. Physically impossible for any germs to survive on it. Then, right in front of the subject, they would take a tea strainer, put the roach in it, and dip it into a glass of apple juice, and then they would invite the subject to take a sip. Logically, scientifically, there is zero danger. The rider knows this. The rider understands what an autoclave is, but only about a third of the people tested would even take a sip. The brain knows it is fine, but the body, the elephant, is screaming, do not put that in your mouth. It highlights the sheer physical dominance of the intuition. Another revealing test is the fake soul contract. Subjects were offered $2 real to sign a piece of paper that explicitly stated, I hereby sell my soul after my death for the sum of $2. But it also clearly stated below the signature line, this is a psychology experiment. It is not a legal or binding contract. They were even told they could rip it up immediately after signing, and yet only about 20% of people would sign it without being heavily prodded. The part that is truly mind-blowing is the reaction of self-proclaimed atheists, people who firmly and intellectually state they do not believe in souls or an afterlife. When presented with the contract, they still hesitated. Their rider is shouting, "Souls are not real, take the free money." But their elephant is stepping backward, feeling this deep, inexplicable cosmic dread. The gut feeling rules even over our stated philosophical beliefs. Which brings us to a vital crossroads. If the elephant is unequivocally making the decisions, what exactly is it responding to? And does everyone's elephant respond to the same things? If we look at the broader landscape of psychological research, we hit a massive structural issue known as the weird problem. Weird is an acronym. It stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And for essentially the entire 20th century, almost all psychological research was conducted on this narrow slice of humanity, mostly undergraduates doing it for course credit. Researchers Joseph Henrich, Stephen Heine, and Ara Norenzayan published a landmark paper pointing this out. Weird populations are statistical anomalies. They are arguably the least typical people you could study if you want to make universal claims about human nature. And Haidt experienced this disconnect firsthand. He did not just take his taboo stories to Ivy League undergraduates. He took them to a McDonald's in a working-class neighborhood in Philadelphia, and then to Brazil, interviewing people across different social classes. The contrast in the data was undeniable. The Ivy League students relied almost entirely on the harm principle from John Stuart Mill, meaning an action is only wrong if it tangibly hurts someone. So an Ivy League student hears the chicken story. Their elephant feels a flash of biological disgust, but their rider instantly overrules it. The rider says, "It is his chicken, in his house. Nobody is getting hurt. It is weird, but not morally wrong." They were the only demographic where a majority tolerated the harmless taboo stories. But when Haidt posed those same scenarios to working-class adults in Philadelphia, or to subjects in Brazil, they were baffled. To non-weird populations, the moral domain is vastly broader. It is not restricted merely to harm or fairness. Their elephants responded powerfully to disrespect, spiritual degradation, and violations of the natural order. They did not need a victim to declare something morally wrong. To them, the act itself degrades the human soul. So we have this massive elephant dictating our judgments, and it is tuned completely differently depending on your culture. But what is equally unsettling is how easily the elephant can be manipulated in the moment. We have to talk about the fart spray experiment at Stanford. It sounds like a prank, but the implications are staggering. A researcher named Alex Jordan sprayed a potent novelty fart spray into a trash can at a busy pedestrian intersection. For the control group, the trash can was clean and odorless. Then he asked passers-by to fill out a survey making moral judgments on controversial issues like cousin marriage. The results are wild. The people who smelled the fart spray judged the moral issues significantly more harshly. The invisible presence of a foul smell triggered their biological disgust reflex, which their brain seamlessly translated into moral disgust. Their rider just invented a rational-sounding reason for why cousin marriage was wrong, completely unaware it was driven by a joke shop spray. And it goes beyond ambient smells. Researcher Thalia Wheatley conducted an unsettling experiment using hypnosis. She hypnotized susceptible subjects to experience a flash of disgust whenever they read a perfectly mundane trigger word like take or often. They would wake up with no memory of the suggestion. Then they were asked to evaluate written moral scenarios. If the scenario contained their trigger word, their elephant felt that hypnotic disgust, and they judged it much more harshly. But the true revelation was the control story about a student council president named Dan. Dan is described as a stellar, completely innocent person trying to schedule inclusive discussions. The text says he often picks topics or tries to take topics that appeal to everyone. He is completely harmless. But for the subjects who had the trigger word embedded in Dan's story, their elephant felt the sudden nauseating disgust, and the inner lawyer panicked and went to work. They severely condemned Dan. When asked why, they wrote things like, "Dan is a popularity-seeking snob," or "he is up to something sinister." They literally invented absurd, defamatory reasons to justify a hypnotic suggestion. And this physical moral connection operates in reverse too. This is called the Macbeth effect. Researchers asked people to recall a moral transgression from their past, a time they lied or cheated. Afterwards, as a thank you, they were offered a choice of free gifts, a pencil or a package of antiseptic hand wipes. The people primed to think about their own immorality were significantly more likely to choose the hand wipes. Thinking about a moral failing literally made them want to physically scrub themselves clean. Out damn spot in real life. So what this tells us is that our most elevated moral judgments are deeply tied to our biology. And if you are wondering whether this means the environment can actually shift how receptive someone is before a conversation even starts, the answer is yes. The environment dictates the receptivity of the elephant. Because of the insular cortex, the part of the brain that evolved to process taste and smell to keep us away from pathogens and rotting food. So how do liberals and conservatives set their equalizers? According to the Moral Foundation's questionnaire, a massive data set, there is a consistent pattern. People who identify as politically liberal rely heavily on a specific subset. They turn the care and fairness sliders all the way up to maximum volume. Liberty is very high as well. But they turn the remaining three, loyalty, authority, and sanctity, much lower. Because it is tuned this way, the liberal moral narrative is fundamentally an emancipation narrative. It is a heroic story about fighting for equality, caring for the vulnerable, and freeing victims from oppression. And if an institution causes harm, the moral imperative is to dismantle it, because authority and tradition do not carry enough weight to justify the harm. Conservatives, on the other hand, set their equalizer differently. They use all 6 sliders much more evenly. They still care about care and fairness, but they turn loyalty, authority, and sanctity up significantly higher. Their moral narrative is a heroic defense narrative, protecting the home, defending the family unit, preserving traditions from decay and chaos, maintaining social order, and guarding sacred institutions. Recognizing this difference is the key to understanding political communication. Haidt argues that conservatives often have a structural advantage in messaging because they have more strings on their instrument. They regularly speak to all 6 moral foundations. They appeal to the whole elephant. Look at the 1988 US presidential election. The George H.W. Bush campaign ran the Willie Horton ad against Michael Dukakis, featuring a mugshot of a man who had committed a brutal crime while on a weekend furlough program that Dukakis supported. Evolution did not build a new brain center for morality, it just co-opted that one. It expanded biological disgust to process social and moral disgust. And validating the elephant through a pleasant physical environment is often the only way to make the rider receptive to a new argument. So if the insular cortex is tasting the social environment, what are the flavors? What specific buttons are being pushed? This brings us to a cornerstone of modern moral psychology, moral foundations theory. Developed by Haidt and his colleagues, they propose that morality is exactly like the physical sense of taste. We all possess the same basic moral taste receptors, and the evolutionary backstory for each one is incredible. These are not arbitrary rules. They are ancient software programs that helped our ancestors survive. The first foundation is care versus harm. This evolved directly from us being mammals. Mammalian babies are incredibly vulnerable. If our ancestors did not feel acute distress seeing a child suffer and joy when nurturing one, we would have gone extinct. This foundation makes us sensitive to suffering and vulnerability. The second foundation is fairness versus cheating. This is rooted in reciprocal altruism. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. In early tribes, cooperation was life or death. But if someone constantly took the meat without hunting, a free rider, they were a threat. So we evolved a razor-sharp radar for cheaters and a deep desire for proportionality and justice. The third foundation is loyalty versus betrayal. Humans are unique in forming massive coalitions beyond our genetic relatives. This evolved from navigating shifting alliances and competing with other groups. It is that deep drive to be a team player, to reward loyalty to the in-group, and to harbor a special hatred for traitors. The fourth foundation is authority versus subversion. We share a long evolutionary history with primates who live in hierarchical structures, but it is not just about raw dominance, it is about maintaining social order, recognizing rank, showing deference, and superiors feeling an obligation to protect those beneath them. Think about running into a high school teacher 20 years later and still feeling awkward calling them by their first name. That is your authority receptor firing. The fifth foundation is sanctity versus degradation. This connects back to the biology of disgust we discussed earlier. The behavioral immune system, avoiding invisible pathogens before modern medicine, the psychology of contagion. Over millennia, it expanded to give us the sense that certain things are elevated and pure, while others are degraded and profane. It is what makes us treat a holy book completely differently than a phone book. And the sixth foundation is liberty versus oppression. Haidt added this one later. It evolved almost in response to the authority foundation. Because while we respect legitimate hierarchies, we loathe bullies. Anthropologists call it a reverse dominance hierarchy. The weaker members band together to take down an alpha who abuses power. That deep rebellious urge to say, "Do not tread on me." Now it is essential to understand that while these six foundations are pre-programmed into our biology, our specific cultures tune these receptors very differently. They can dial some up and dial others down. There is a fascinating example of this from the Middle East, the concept of urd, which heavily overlaps with our concept of honor. It involves the loyalty, authority, and sanctity foundation specifically regarding safeguarding the family and female relatives. It is a localized tuning of the moral receptors designed to maintain strong kinship networks in that specific environment. And researchers debate whether we should add more foundations like ownership or honesty, but there are also valid critiques of the whole theory. Some psychologists push back with dyadic morality. They argue that all these moral flavors really just boil down to the single foundation of harm. They say even when people claim to be upset about disrespect, if you dig deep enough, they perceive some form of harm occurring, whether it is societal harm or spiritual harm. There is also a sharp critique from Astral Codex 10, specifically targeting Haidt's understanding of the sanctity foundation in India. The norm of eating with the right hand and wiping with the left. Haidt, as an evolutionary psychologist, essentially says it is a coordination norm to avoid disease transmission, social utility. But the reviewer points out a glaring flaw in that logic. They argue Haidt has it completely backward regarding the lived experience of the believer. The person practicing this does not think, "I must use my right hand to maintain a functional coordination norm." They literally believe at a cosmic level that the left hand is inherently profane and the right hand is sacred. The critique suggests Haidt's secular perspective blinds him to how deep the feeling of sacredness actually goes. Think of it like an audio equalizer on a soundboard. We all inherit the exact same 6 sliders, but the culture we are born into slides different frequencies up or down. We are all listening to the same song of human morality, but the mix sounds completely different, which is the perfect bridge to our next concept. Because if we all have these sliders, why do our political parties look so completely alien to one another? Why does a political debate feel like two people speaking entirely different languages? To understand modern polarization, we have to look at how different ideologies set those equalizer sliders. And to be clear, the goal here is to impartially analyze psychological messaging. We are looking strictly at the empirical data. We are not endorsing or condemning any political side, just looking at the mixing board. If you analyze that ad, it is a simultaneous multi-foundation strike on the elephant. It hits the care foundation by highlighting the innocent victim, but it also deeply strikes authority by portraying a breakdown of law and order, and it strikes loyalty, playing on tribal fears of an outsider attacking the in-group. 3 different taste receptors at once. Compare that to John Kerry's 2004 campaign against George W. Bush. Kerry's repeating slogan was, "Help is on the way," which speaks almost exclusively to the Care Foundation. It frames the country as a helpless victim needing rescue. Haidt suggests Kerry could have been significantly more persuasive if he had engaged the Fairness and Cheater Detection Foundations when criticizing Bush's deficit spending. Instead of just saying we need to help the middle class, Kerry could have asked, "You are going to pay for that, George." That single phrase completely reframes the opponent. It paints Bush as a free rider cheating the system. It hits the conservative equalizer in a way that help is on the way never could. And our preference for these narratives is inextricably tied to our innate biological personalities, the big 5 personality traits. The correlations between personality traits, politics, and even movie preferences are staggering. Look at the extremes. Liberals consistently score much higher on openness to experience, meaning they biologically crave novelty, diversity, and the unfamiliar. The movie preference data backs this up. Massive fans of Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey score in the absolute top percentiles for openness because it is weird, non-linear, and visually spectacular, whereas conservatives score significantly higher on conscientiousness. They value structure, order, and tradition. They find comfort in the known. And their movie of choice, Pretty Woman, highly structured, deeply traditional, completely predictable. Fans score in the 97th percentile for conscientiousness. The implications are profound. Our aesthetics, personality traits, and political ideologies are woven from the exact same psychological thread, which explains why we feel so alienated from the other side. We literally experience the world through different taste receptors, and it can feel bleak. It sounds like morality is just a tool designed to divide us into warring camps, but the research points to a twist. Morality also possesses a transcendent power to unite us. Haidt introduces the concept of homo duplex, our dual nature. We are 90% chimp and 10% bee. The 90% chimp part makes intuitive sense. We spend most of our time being self-interested, competitive, focused on personal survival. We are the center of our own universe. But then there is the 10% bee. Under specific conditions, humans possess a psychological hive switch. When it is flipped, it shuts down the I and merges us into a giant we. Emil Durkheim called this collective effervescence, the intense passion and ecstasy that group rituals generate. It pulls us out of the mundane world and elevates us. The examples of this are incredible. William McNeill, a historian drafted into the army in 1941, spent months doing nothing but marching in close order formation. Sounds mind-numbing, but he described a profound altered state of consciousness, a sense of personal enlargement. It was not just walking, it was muscular bonding. The individual soldiers dissolved into a single entity, and we see it in completely different contexts too. The former CEO of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, at a warehouse rave, through repetitive music, synchronized dancing, laser lights, he experienced a total dissolution of ego, unconditional unity with strangers. It changed his life and how he built his company. And you do not even have to go to a rave. We do it every weekend in the fall. College football. Take the University of Virginia. 50,000 people dress in the same colors, gather to tailgate, walk into a stadium, and when their team scores, they physically lock arms with strangers and sway back and forth singing the good old song. The choreography is not an accident. The swaying, the touch, the vocalization, it triggers collective effervescence. And then the second the singing ends, they transition into primitive, aggressive fist-pumping chants directed at the opposing team. They are enacting ancient tribal warfare rituals. They are not individuals anymore. They are one organism. Biologically, this unity is heavily mediated by the release of oxytocin. The media calls it the cuddle hormone. Like if we pumped it into the water supply, we would have world peace. But there is a massive caveat. Oxytocin does not make us love all of humanity. It makes us parochial altruists, meaning it bonds us fiercely to our in-group so we can more effectively outcompete, dominate, and destroy an out-group. The love is conditional and tribal. The same hive switch that makes you hug a stranger at a football game is the exact same switch that allows nations to go to war. That is the core paradox. Morality binds us together into cooperative groups, but in the exact same motion, it blinds us to the humanity of the other side. Morality binds and blinds. The hive switch is a neutral mechanism. It can build civilization or fuel horrific violence, which brings us to the climax of this whole deep dive. If we are wired to be tribal, if our reasoning is just a lawyer defending an easily triggered elephant, and we are deaf to the other side's equalizers, what do we actually do? How do we take this X-ray of the mind and fix how we communicate? Are we doomed to yell across the Thanksgiving table forever? We change our approach to persuasion entirely. We abandon the fantasy of pure logic. The biggest obstacle is the my side bias. When we try to convince someone, our instinct is to deploy arguments that appeal to us, completely ignoring that their equalizer is tuned differently. The solar panel example in the research illustrates this perfectly. Imagine a progressive environmentalist trying to convince a traditional conservative to install solar panels. The my side bias makes the progressive talk about climate change, saving polar bears, reducing the carbon footprint, leaning heavily on the care and harm foundation because that moves their elephant. But the conservative's elephant is not tuned to that frequency, especially when it is framed in left-wing activism. So how do you actually persuade them? You translate your goal into their moral language. You talk about energy independence, getting off the grid, self-reliance, not depending on foreign oil. You are hitting the liberty and loyalty foundations. You are talking to their elephant in a language it respects. The product is exactly the same solar panels, but you completely change the moral framing. And we have to go a step further. Even with perfect framing, there is a sequence to persuasion. You cannot reason with the elephant if it is already leaning away from you. If they feel judged or attacked, the inner lawyer goes into full defense mode and no logic will penetrate. You must calm the elephant first, using receptive listening. The story about the doctor and the anti-vaccine mother really hammered this home. The stakes are incredibly high. Previous doctors had tried relentlessly to persuade her with facts, statistics, and stern lectures about measles. They were talking directly to her rider, and she felt belittled and condescended to. Her primal instinct to protect her child was being attacked. The elephant dug its heels in. But then she meets a new doctor who tries a counterintuitive approach. He does not bring a single chart. For an hour, he simply asks open-ended, non-judgmental questions. He validates her underlying moral foundation. He tells her he knows she loves her child fiercely and wants to make the best choice, and he explicitly respects her ultimate authority as a mother. He speaks to the Care and Liberty Foundations. He looks at her and says, "Whether you choose to vaccinate or not, I respect your decision as someone who wants the best for your kids." She later said that single sentence was worth all the gold in the world. He calmed her elephant, and by doing that, he allowed her rider to relax. She voluntarily chose to vaccinate her son before leaving the hospital that very day. Dale Carnegie was right decades ago in How to Win Friends and Influence People. You have to begin in a friendly way. He was a master elephant whisperer. You cannot logic someone out of a position they did not logic themselves into. You have to connect with the feeling first, respect their moral matrix, calm the elephant, and then offer a new perspective. It is the only empirically proven way. So let's bring it all home. We dismantled the myth of pure reason. The elephant of intuition rules the rider of reason. The gut feeling comes first, justification second. We explored the weird problem, realizing our baseline moral assumptions might be global anomalies. We dove into the biology of disgust. We mapped the 6 moral taste receptors: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. We saw how those sliders explain the political divide. Liberals leaning on an emancipation narrative, conservatives on a heroic defense narrative. We discovered the hive switch that makes us 10% B. And we learned how to actually hack the matrix by overcoming our my side bias. So here is your homework. Next time you feel a flash of outrage online or hear a relative say something baffling at dinner, do not attack with facts. Step back and look at the invisible moral equalizer. Ask yourself which slider is driving their elephant and which one is driving yours. It changes how you see the world entirely. And I want to leave you with one final lingering question. We have seen today that our deepest moral convictions can be swayed by a hypnotic suggestion, a shared song at a stadium, or the smell of a garbage can. So ask yourself, how much of what you confidently consider to be your absolute, unshakable moral truth is actually just a historical accident of the specific environment your elephant happens to live in. Let that one sink in. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning your matrix, keep talking to the elephant, and I will see you next time.